Hello, everyone. My name is Enosh, and I'm going to be speaking about Aristotle for my historical presentation today. Now, Aristotle was born in 384 BCE in the Macedonian region of northeastern Greece. He was born in a small city called Stagira. At the age of 17, Aristotle was sent to Athens to study in Plato's academy. He was actually a student of Plato's for over 20 years, but he is famous for rejecting Plato's theory of forms. Plato's theory of forms was that the physical world is not really the real world. He insists that the real world is beyond our physical world. Aristotle had left Athens when Plato had died in 348 BCE. He moved to Artinius, which was where Hermias had ruled, a former student at Plato Academy. It was here where he met his wife, the adoptive daughter of Hermias. Then they moved to Macedonia, where Aristotle served and tutored Alexander the Great. Aristotle was a thin man. He dressed flashily and wore fashionable hairstyles and a number of rings. Above all, he was a prolific writer, lecturer, and polymath. Now, he was a towering figure in Greek philosophy. He was also known as the master or even the philosopher. In any area of topics that he had studied, he most likely transformed them. He was an intellectual giant of his age. I mean, he made use of his time and wrote many dialogues, as many as 200 treatises. Aristotle was the first to develop even a formal system of reasoning. Now, he was identified as the founder of logic in the West. He had written many books and works about logic. These books served as traditional manuals of logic, books like on interpretation, prior analytics, posterior analytics, and more. Now, Aristotle shows how logic can demonstrate what one should by developing the concepts of truth, predication, and definition. Aristotle says that in order for a sentence to be considered true or false, it must include a subject and a predicate. Aristotle holds that there are two kinds of constituents of meaningful sentences, which would be nouns and their derivatives, which are conventional symbols without tense or aspect, and verbs which have a tense and aspect. Though all meaningful speech consists of combinations of these, Aristotle limits logic to the consideration of statements, which assert or deny the presence of something in the past, present, or future. Now, Aristotle had many works, but only some of them survived in fragments. Works such as Critique of Plato's Theory of Forms and several other philosophical dialogues. Now, when it comes to Aristotle's philosophy, Aristotle's basic approach to philosophy is best grasped initially by way of contrast. Aristotle was known for being the founder of logic in the West. On interpretation, written by Aristotle begins with a discussion of meaning. Now, in which case, written words are symbols of words, while spoken words are symbols of thoughts. This theory of signification can be understood as a semantics that explain how different alphabets can signify the same spoken language, while different languages can signify the same thoughts. This theory connects the meaning of symbols to logical consequences as well. Now, Aristotle shows how logic can show how one should think. Now, among the great achievements of him, it would be the first systematic treatment of the principles of correct reasoning, which would be the first logic. Now, although today we recognize many forms of logic beyond Aristotle, it remains true that he not only developed a theory of deduction, now called syllogistic. In Aristotle's logic, the basic ingredients of reasoning are given in terms of inclusion and exclusion relations, of the sort graphically captured many years later by the device of Venn diagrams. He begins with the notion of patently correct sort of argument, one whose evident and unassailable acceptability induces Aristotle to refer it to perfect deduction. Generally, a deduction, according to Aristotle, is a valid or acceptable argument. More exactly, a deduction is an argument in which, when certain things are laid down, something else follows by necessity in virtue of their being so. His view of deductions is then akin to a notion of validity, though there are some minor differences. Aristotle also approaches the study of logic not as an end of itself, but with a view to its role in human inquiry and explanation. Logic is a tool, one making an important but incomplete contribution to science and dialect. Its contribution is incomplete because science employs arguments which are more than mere deductions. A deduction is minimally a valid syllogism, and certainly science must employ arguments passing this threshold. Now, a deduction is minimally a valid syllogism, and still, science still needs more. A science proceeds by organizing the data in its domain into a series of arguments which, beyond being deductions, feature premises that are necessary and, as Aristotle says, better known by nature or more intelligible by nature. By this, he means that they should reveal the genuine mind-independent nature of things. Now, Aristotle had a major influence in philosophy, especially in other philosophers in antiquity. This was because of his works had impacted people generations after his death. His influence went beyond just his life, and after his death, his school, the Lyceum, carried on for some period of time. Though precisely how long is unclear, in the century immediately after his death, in the Middle Ages, Aristotle's works were translated to Arabic, which led to his impacts of those of Islamic descent. In Jewish philosophical tradition, Aristotle is called the chief of philosophers and uses Aristotelian concepts to analyze the context of the Hebrew Bible. In the 21st century, even other philosophers drew on Aristotle's theoretical philosophy. Now, today, philosophers of various stripes continue to look at Aristotle for guidance and inspiration, though perhaps Aristotle's influence is seen most overtly and outwardly in the resurgence of virtue ethics, which began in the last half of the 20th century. It seems safe to say that Aristotle's stature is unlikely to diminish anytime soon in the future. If any indication shows that that is to happen, a quick search of present encyclopedia turns up to show that Aristotle comes up more than any philosopher or any philosophical movement. Only Plato would come close. Now, he had many important contributions to philosophy. His contributions to philosophy go beyond just one aspect, and it is in many ways referring to logic, criticism, rhetoric, physics, biology, psychology, mathematics, metaphysics, ethics, politics, you name it. Among all the great philosophers, Aristotle is known as the philosopher, one of the greats of his age. Thank you, Dr. Wong. Thank you for this class. Thanks for listening. It was a great semester. Have a great summer.